Thanks for tuning in to This Week in Missouri Politics. I'm Joe Lakin, filling in today for Scott Fawn. It was a busy week in politics here in Missouri, Iowa, and Washington, and today we've got a great panel to break it down for you. First, Irl Scissors, St. Louis area lobbyist. Good to have you with us. State Representative Donna Baringer, good to be with you today.
Thank you for having me.
Gregg Keller, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Senator Jim Lembke, certainly not, last but not least, thanks for being here.
Nobody told me Scott wasn't going to be here.
Tough draw, huh? Well, we'll start with you, Senator. The Iowa Caucus was held Monday night. Obviously, as expected, Donald Trump won in a walk. But talk a little bit about Democrats. It appears that Bernie Sanders is likely going to win this narrowly. Tell us what you think. What does that mean for the state of the Democratic Party?
First of all, I don't understand how these caucuses, don't work. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really something for us all to look at. I don't know. I think that Donald Trump, on the first three issues that we're going to talk about today, is just the big winner. I mean, here the Democrat Party is in disarray. The people that are at the top seem to be people that in Missouri just aren't going to relate well. So I think this bodes well for our governor's race. It bodes well across the country. I think that the Republican Party are in a good lane right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Greg, same question to you.
Yeah, I think it's bad news for the Democrats all around. First of all, politically, I mean, Bernie Sanders is their front runner. It was just announced recently that he actually did win the popular vote in the Iowa caucuses. So he really is the winner of the Iowa caucuses. This is a man who is, and I don't say this lightly, he's a communist. I don't say that as a Republican political operative. It's just a statement of fact. So the Democrats with him as their front runner right now are in a very bad place. I think more from a perception standpoint, I think that's even worse for the Democrats because it was just one of the most embarrassing spectacles from a political standpoint any of us have ever seen. Democrats seem to want to micromanage every single facet of our lives as Americans, and yet they can't run a two-car parade of the Iowa caucuses. It was a bad week for Democrats.
So play devil's advocate here, and obviously political odds makers, which is kind of funny to hear people say political odds makers these days, but certainly have Sanders in the lead. If there's somebody that's going to beat Sanders, who do you think it is?
I've thought all along that the only person who has a chance of both winning the Democrat primary and competing with Donald Trump for some of these Rust Belt upper Midwestern votes is probably Pete Buttigieg. I think he has serious systemic problems with the African American vote. I don't believe that he's going to get either the turnout or the percentages, or would get the kind of turnout percentages in the general election he would need in that community in order to win. But as a Republican, he's the only person in the field who I look at who makes me think, okay, I could possibly see that person giving Donald Trump a run for his money.
Interesting. Representative Baringer, you obviously represent a fairly safe Democratic seat in St. Louis City, but you have colleagues that are on the ballot this year, both for the House and the Senate and statewide. What does the rise of Bernie Sanders mean? Is he a nominee that if you all, your party nominates, that you guys can win those tough races?
First, I want to go back. Can I go back to the Iowa caucus?
Yeah, sure.
Because the reason I want to go back there is because first I want to take ownership as the Democratic Party for a total technology mess, right? So what we have found is that, and this is the perfect example, moving forward for any election, is that if you're using all technology, it's easier to find the mistakes, but you can't fix them. Versus the old way of doing it, it was much easier to fix them, but it was harder to find them. And this is where we have tipped on the technology divide, and so we're trying to say it's all technology. We need to balance the two, so we make sure if we do make the mistakes, we can go back the old way and recount. And I think that's going to impact the Iowa caucus, because you cannot say it was an easy slam dunk for any of the candidates because of this whole mess. I think the next presidential primary or caucus that occurs, I think will have more influence than Iowa did. And so that's why I'm interested to see the next one and what the numbers are on those. Because I would like to see Pete pull a winner out. And if Bernie is pulling it out, and let's say Missouri has to have Bernie as our a candidate. My concern is the opposite of what happened with Hillary and Trump. The Bernie people stayed home, okay, and didn't come out and vote. So they didn't vote for Hillary. So then Trump wins. The people who don't want Bernie, I'm afraid, will stay home this time and hand it to Trump. And that's the message the Democrats have to get out. Do not stay home. It is not doable. No.
Yeah, I used the example of somebody earlier this week with the technology. It's sort of like the rest of us with cell phones. When you're relying on a cell phone, you don't remember a phone number, you don't remember anything. When the technology's down, sometimes you're flying blind.
Shouldn't you also think about when you're going to contract out that kind of work, if the name of the company is Shadow, isn't that a little nefarious?
Yeah, who knows? Earl, question to you on this. I think, to call Sanders the presumptive nominee or front runner, I think is probably overstated at this point. But if somebody's going to beat him in the Democratic Party, who's that going to be?
So, on my way here this morning, I heard on the radio Buttigieg may have pulled off the Iowa caucuses and been victorious. So there's still a question out there as to who actually won. So this side of the table has talked a lot about Bernie, but it very well may be Buttigieg. Regardless, welcome to flyover country, Iowa. I think we've seen the last of the Iowa caucuses. I really do. It's obviously not that important. It was important to these candidates who spent millions of dollars in that state. And that poor state's not going to see that money coming in the next cycle, that's for sure. Tons of money was spent in that state. No media bump for the winner, no fundraising bump for the winner. So it really puts all the people who invested so much in Iowa, they really got nothing, very little out of it. So all the focus will be on New Hampshire. And really, to your question, I'm going to wait till Super Tuesday because if Buttigieg allegedly won Iowa and Bernie is a front runner, I really think until Super Tuesday, the Democrats are not going to be able to figure out who really is their front runner. Bloomberg is spending a ton of money banking on Super Tuesday, didn't spend any money on Iowa. Joe Biden obviously didn't have a good performance in Iowa, probably won't have a great performance in New Hampshire, but he also is banking on Super Tuesday. So I really think the Democrats won't know who their front runner candidate is until we get there.
Greg, to you on this, if we're waiting for Super Tuesday to determine a Democratic frontrunner and sort of combine, people are talking about the big winner Monday. Was it Sanders? Was it Buttigieg? I almost wonder if it wasn't Joe Biden, in that obviously a terrible performance, but the fact that the results were not tabulated that night allowed him to sort of leave on a jet in the middle of the night to head to New Hampshire without sort of that news cycle being full of tough news for him. So, I mean, does his slide, obviously Mayor Pete's going to try to occupy that sort of more mainstream lane in the Democratic Party, but if we're waiting until Super Tuesday, does that mean Mike Bloomberg's strategy may actually pay off?
Yeah, I mean, I think you first took a look at Mike Bloomberg's strategy, and political professionals say to themselves, how on earth can this possibly work?
We all remember Rudy Giuliani,
Rudy
right?
Giuliani from 2008. He had that South Carolina firewall. How did that work out? I agree with almost everything that Earl said, with the exception of even considering Joe Biden to be in this race anymore. I think Joe Biden's political career is now over. I think that was an embarrassing result for a guy who's run for president roughly 172 times, who has participated in the Iowa caucuses about the same number of times. For him to finish fourth, he's not going to do well in New Hampshire. His biggest problem at this point is that he's broke. He's got very little money left. They're already cutting back their ad buys in states all across the country. And it's going to be very difficult for him to attract donor money at this point, with people saying the kind of things about his campaign that they are. So I think we should be singing a swan song for Joe Biden's political career right now.
Yeah, I think that's possible. Earl, come to you on the State of the Union. Obviously, Tuesday night, we're still sort of dealing with Iowa caucus hangover here. Tell us, thoughts on State of the Union. I think it's very well received by Republicans. I saw some numbers that said independents maybe thought it was very well. I think the president obviously has had fairly high reviews on prepared speeches across the spectrum. When he's riffing, it becomes a little more polarized in terms of support. But what were your thoughts on the State of the Union?
I will confess there was a Blues game on that night. They won 6-3, but I did catch chunks of the State of the Union, and I will say that the president somehow stayed on script. But what I thought was interesting is I don't think anybody can remember anything that he really said in the State of the Union. Everybody's talking about Nancy Pelosi ripping up the paper afterwards because that was such a visual. So in one respect, he stayed on script, didn't cause any trouble, and hit the notes that he was supposed to hit. In the other camp, and the only thing anybody remembers is what Pelosi did. So, and again, with Iowa lingering in the background, I think it was sort of a wash. It was a one-day press hit, and we're moving on from there.
Yeah. Representative Baringer, as a full disclosure Republican operative, I'm actually somebody who respects Speaker Pelosi's savvy. I think, as far as I'm concerned, she's probably the savviest operator. She obviously tried to push back and delay impeachment, ultimately was kind of backed into a corner by her caucus. I don't look at anything she does and think it was done sort of on a whim. What are your thoughts on the tearing of the speech? I mean, is that frustration over impeachment, over the speech, over not shaking hands with the president, or is that just political theater and somebody looking for something to raise money the next day?
Well, it was very disrespectful that the president did not shake her hand. And so I would have also felt like I had been dissed, and I would have been sitting there saying, I can't believe we've gotten to this level. All right, so that's where we are. The way we treat each other, the hostility between, and when I saw her do that, well, I know it's not, becoming of the position. As a female, I was like, I get that. I get that she was upset. And I always have to say to myself, if she was a man, would Trump have not shook her hand? I really want to know that answer.
Interesting. Greg, your take?
It was disgusting. What she did. It really was. I mean, I'm not even speaking hyperbolically here. What that speech contained was some unbelievably poignant stories, life stories about some American people who were ordinary Americans, really not all that extraordinary Americans who were in that room that night. Gentleman who is a Tuskegee Airman had been named just that day as a Brigadier General by the President of the United States in the Oval Office. A returning member of our armed forces coming back to see his children for the first time since being.
I thought that was a high point of the speech.
I got choked up when I saw that. Coming back to see his young children who he hadn't seen in months. He'd been in the theater of war. Young African-American woman who was recently given an opportunity scholarship by the President of the United States. And what Nancy Pelosi did was, out of partisan piquet and hatred for this man, took those people's stories and with glee tore them up in front of the American people. It was one of the most disrespectful, disgusting things I've seen in politics in my career.
Okay. Jim?
I want to focus on, this was President Trump at his best. This State of the Union address, just across the board, the reviews on it have been just very high. The next morning at the prayer breakfast, the president again at his best, and then yesterday afternoon, in the East Room, he does a press conference and talks for an hour and just thanks the people that have surrounded him with support. It was just good for America. I mean, it made, I believe, no matter what your political background is, that you could say, look, this is a positive thing. So this is what I see. I mean, again, I was proud of the president with the State of the Union.
Great. And we'll be back right after this to talk about impeachment.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations, and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association.
Your energy needs are changing. That's why at Ameren, Missouri, we're not waiting on the future. We're building it with the Smart Energy Plan, advancing thousands of projects across the state, helping reduce emissions through cleaner energy sources, boost reliability with self-healing equipment, and better withstand storms with new composite poles. Moving Missouri forward and bringing us all a little closer together. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Thanks for staying with us here on This Week in Missouri Politics. Senator Lembke, going to come back to you. Impeachment, obviously moving through this week, the Monday caucus, Tuesday State of the Union, Wednesday impeachment acquittal. Tell me what you think this whole impeachment process means for politics of 2020.
Well, I think that's a really good question, Joe, in that what's the standard? What's the constitutional standard? What's the history behind whether it be a Republican or a Democrat and who's in control? I think that this has been a national nightmare for us. And the idea that we're through it, I think is, again, good for the country. The president, again, yesterday, talking about what he has gone through, what his family's gone through, what the nation has gone through. And I think that we have to start looking at each other and saying, is this something that we want to do to each other when we don't agree on issues, when we don't agree with the person who won the last election? I mean, we need to be about the people's business. And I think that hopefully, if we've learned anything through this debacle, is that whatever side of the equation you are politically, that you can respect somebody or not respect them, but still be able to work through the process and not go to these nuclear options.
Yeah. Gregg, what do you think? Is this something by, how many news cycles do we have between now and November? Is this something where bases are going to feel strongly about it, but ultimately not a vote mover? Or do you think it's a 2020 issue?
Oh, I think if you look at the president's perceptual ratings over the course of impeachment and what's happened, I think you see that this has been a boon to the president's approval ratings and was a huge misstep by the Democrats. Remember, this is a Democrat party who's been trying to impeach this man since he literally became president of the United States. They filed their first articles of impeachment 2 months after he was impeached. You know why they tried to impeach him? Because he tweeted mean things about some communist members of their House majority, members of the squad who were absolutely deserving of derision given some of the things that they've said and done over the course of their careers. So this is a Democrat party that is absolutely obsessed with impeaching this president. President's approval ratings have gone up 10%. I hope they continue to do it.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the politics of this? Obviously, deeply held beliefs on both sides of this issue, but any thoughts on the politics of this, what this means for Missouri in 2020?
I think it does have an impact, and the reason it has an impact. So first, let's back up to the point that, do you really think any of the average citizen watched the impeachment? They didn't, because it's like watching paint dry. All right. So all they're going to remember from this impeachment is that there's all these things that the current president has done that they do not like, and they can't figure out why nothing has happened. And then they're going to see that because if you're a Democrat, we got the impeachment done in the congressional, but then it came to the Senate, and because that's run by the Republicans, it did not happen. But for the first time historically, a Republican voted with the Democrats on an impeachment on a president. That's never happened before, which was Mitt Romney. So when he came out and gave that speech about his faith and how important that was to him, and that's why he had to cast his vote that way, I think that does have an impact. And here's what has an impact. When women go, and I'm going to throw that out there, when women go to the polls for the congressional races and the senatorial races, if they are a Republican, they may have said, I've had enough, and they may hold their noses, and they're going to vote for that Democrat at the lower level congressional and senatorial.
Interesting. Earl, I mean, thoughts? Obviously, you look at Democrats in Missouri have not really embraced this. I mean, your two congressional members did, but certainly not something they're running on, which makes you wonder what they think about the impact of it. What are your thoughts on the 2020 impact of impeachment?
I just question what has happened to moderation in this country. The fact that Senator Romney could come up and stand up on his principles and vote for impeachment, but no other Republican senators could even consider it. And frankly, if you are a Republican these days, you can't consider it. So it was it was something significant for Senator Romney to step out like that. That being said, on the Democratic side, there's similar issues with moderation. Just looking at the presidential candidates that we have right now. So in terms of long-term impacts of the impeachment, I think this, as Gregg said, some Democrats in the House wanted to impeach him right away, but I know the Speaker was trying to put it off as long as she could because she knew to have it done and over with now, the election's not for a number of months away. I don't know that people are going to be talking necessarily about it or running any significant TV ads or anything that will have any impact on this impeachment. So it'll be whatever they're talking about in the next 6 months. Yeah. So that's my concern. And in terms of Missouri, it's the same thing as what Representative Baringer said. I don't know that anybody was really paying attention on a day-to-day basis, or if it was just in the background like elevator music. So
yeah, certainly. Well, let's talk a little bit about something that probably will be on the ballot. Clean Missouri. Obviously, the Clean Missouri measure passed in 2018, an effort by Missouri Republicans in the legislature to modify some of those provisions, strengthen some of those provisions. What are your thoughts, just sort of political prognostication? Is that something passes the legislature? It appears now that the Senate is allowing it to advance, but any thoughts on its prospects in the fall?
Well, the Missouri General Assembly, led by the Republicans of late, has a long history of overturning what the public has voted on previously. They've done it with minimum wage. They've done it with campaign contributions. Cleaner Missouri or whatever will be another consideration where the people voted one way. The General Assembly wants to move the goalposts, and that's what they've done, passing this legislation. So I suspect that it'll end up on the governor's desk, and the public will again get to vote on it. A long time ago, Jeff Rowe was quoted in the newspaper, and he basically just said, "Just tell us what the rules are." And that's sort of how I feel. Just tell us what the rules are. You know, we keep changing them, whether it's by ballot initiative or by passing something through the General Assembly. Let's just keep the rules straight so that everyone can follow them.
Yeah. Representative Baringer, obviously, it appears this is headed over to the House. I would assume, and I assume you would, that this is likely to pass the House. Thoughts on the measure generally?
Well, I mean, this is a measure where the people voted, and this is what they voted for unanimously, and now we're going back as a legislative body and we're going to undo it. And so we don't have the votes in the House and the Senate to really stop it. And so what are we going to see that will be the most egregious? And one of the most egregious things I see about this piece of legislation, I'm hoping it does get fixed, is that we used to count the population by every person. Now the definition in this new bill says one person, one vote. What that means is if you're a child or you're in the middle of getting your citizenship, you won't be counted. And then when we look to go to redistricting, these districts, especially in rural areas that have high immigrant populations, they're going to be very difficult to be able to draw the boundaries for these districts because they're going to get rid of some, 30% of their population. And don't assume just because you don't have your citizenship that you aren't on your way to becoming a citizen. I think that's the biggest misnomer here.
Interesting. Gregg Keller, you've been knee-deep in this and related issues. What's your take?
Let's remember the only reason we're here to begin with is because garbage human George Soros funds a huge portion of the Democrat Party today. He's bankrolled this entire effort. This is a man who literally made his billions of dollars bankrupting pensioners in Ireland and over in Asia. I do find it a little bit ironic that the Democrat Party has spent the better part of the last 5 or 10 years going after Rex Sinquefield, who literally made his billions of dollars by making average Americans and pensioners wealthy, while at the same time, through this Clean Missouri effort, they're taking money from garbage human George Soros, who's a billionaire, by making people bankrupt. I think that's interesting. But let's just remember that's why we're here. Because George Soros is telling the Democrat Party what to do. He's funding a majority of their operations these days. And when he says jump, they say how high.
Yeah.
George Soros survived the Holocaust. There are plenty of individuals with a ton of money on the Republican side that are doing things just as significant, if not as controversial as he is.
I'm not sure you guys want to get into a discussion about his Holocaust-related activities.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah, Jim,
jump in here.
I actually have a little unique question for you on this, Jim. You served in the state Senate, and I was surprised when I saw the headlines that Democrats were seemingly allowing this to advance, obviously over their objections, but we're going to sit down and end a filibuster of it. Talk a little bit about what goes into that thinking when it's a deeply held belief that you want to kill something, but you have to consider that you got 4 months of session and other fights left to fight. What goes into that thinking?
Well, I mean, when you have...
Not that you ever filibustered.
Yeah, right. When you have 8 Democrats, after the governor has, appointed 2 out of the Senate, and you have, it's all about, bandwidth and time. There's a lot of time. The Democrats have to pick their fights. And they put up a good show, as far as filibustering this for about 12 hours. But I'm sure that the deal was, let us, filibuster, and then we'll let you pass it a couple of days later. I mean, you just have to pick your battles. What I want to say about Clean Missouri and about Cleaner Missouri is going to be a little bit different take, in that my position is they're both unconstitutional. Neither one of them should be on our ballot because they deal with multiple subjects. Now, if you just want to deal with this redistricting issue, that's the bill that should have been passed. Now, I think it's going to be interesting to see what the court does. Remember what the court did on Clean Missouri. The lower court threw it off, and then the Supreme Court put it back on. And they threw it off because of that constitutional standard of single subject. You have to go to the voters with single subject. They didn't know if they were voting on ethics reform or voting on the redistricting. That's the bill we should have passed. And we still have time. I think that's what we should do. I don't think we should have these multiple subjects in here. And the ethics reform was a smokescreen by both sides.
Interesting. Greg, moving sort of throughout the week here, something that kind of blew up towards the end of the week, this audit, Auditor Galloway's audit of then Attorney General Josh Hawley. Obviously, Attorney General Schmidt has now gotten in the action on it. Talk a little bit about, try to boil that down for people in a minute of what's going on and what comes of it.
Nicole Galloway is in a world of hurt. Her campaign is faltering. She's not raising any money. The poll numbers are terrible. She's down something like 20 points. She's running way too far to the left. And now this audit thing, basically what happened here was her office was caught fabricating an audit. They then tried to cover it up. After trying to cover it up, it was investigated by the House. It's going to be investigated by the Senate, and now the Attorney General is saying that she and her office probably committed a felony. The big news here is that Democrats are in a world of hurt with their gubernatorial candidate.
Interesting. Representative Donna Baringer, I assume you have a different perspective.
Yeah, are we talking about the same thing? So as the auditor, she did an audit of the Attorney General's office as Hawley was in office. And the Attorney General, so when she was doing this audit, as our auditor, her attorney is always the Attorney General. So she's working with Eric Schmidt to look at our former Attorney General. She put all of the information, because of the confide and what was going on, were they mixing politics with policy inside the Attorney General's office? And so all these conversations that he wanted, in confidence or confided, she put in the report. So as the auditor, by law, she is to give that report to the public. That's her job. But her attorney is our Attorney General, who's telling her, no, don't release the reports. You can't do that. Well, then then he's not representing the people, because her job is the auditor. It's inside the report. It's not outside the report. So it should be released. And so she's not doing anything illegal.
Okay, interesting. Let's do a lightning round. Who won the week, Earl?
Newly elected Hall of Famer Isaac Bruce.
Absolutely.
Good for the community, good for St. Louis.
Representative Donna Baringer.
Nicole Galloway, because they tried to get her not to do something that she should do.
Greg, I assume different than that.
Oh, yeah, it's Governor Parson. This governor's race is over before it started.
Senator Lembke.
I'm going to say the Missouri taxpayers this week, because of senators leaving to appointments, there's been a reshuffle in some of the committees in the Senate. And now we have a majority on the Ways and Means Committee of the Conservative Caucus. We have 4 senators that will vote to cut the people's taxes.
Interesting. I'm going to give it to my dad, who's celebrating his birthday this week in Chiefs Kingdom. And speaking of Chiefs Kingdom, be sure to tune in next week from Kansas City. Thank you.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.